Creepy mysteries can sit unsolved for decades, taking up space on the desk of the investigators dedicating their lives to figuring it out. Sometimes these cases are solved even after many decades have passed. However, some cases remain unexplained and continue to baffle experts and sleuths alike. Number 5. On February 24th, 1983, Donnie Decker attended the funeral of his grandfather, James Cashaw. At the time, Danny had been released from the Monroe Correctional Facility, where he was serving a 4 to 10 month sentence for receiving stolen goods on compassionate grounds. During his release, Donnie began experiencing things that neither he nor his friends could explain. And to this day, the events surrounding February 24th, 1983 have baffled experts and remain unsolvable. Donnie left his grandfather's funeral early as he became irritated that everyone painted him as a good man who would have done anything for his family. In reality, Donnie had suffered at the hands of his grandfather and had kept it a secret for decades. Following the passing of his grandfather, Donnie felt a wave of relief wash over him. But on February 24th, 1983, something manifested itself in Donnie that would lead him on a bizarre path of unexplained events. As Donnie was on leave from the Monroe Correctional Facility, his parents didn't allow him to stay with them, and instead he stayed with family friends Bob and Jeannie Kiefer. Donnie made his way back to the Kiefers' home, headed to the bathroom, and got himself ready for dinner. As he was washing his hands, he felt an eerie chill wash over him before he zoned out and saw the vision of an old man in a crown laughing at him. During this trance-like state, Donnie said he felt something scratch him, and when he came to, he found 3 deep claw marks on his right wrist. He cleaned up his wounds and headed downstairs to eat, trying to put the bizarre event into the back of his mind. After eating and engaging in conversation with the Kiefers, they retired to the living room to watch TV before going to bed, and that's when the bizarre, unexplained events began to happen. As they sat down and watched the TV, water began pouring down the walls. The Kiefers' landlords, Ron and Romaine Van Wy, were called to the house because it was presumed that there was a leak. But upon inspection, nothing was wrong. To Kiefer's surprise, there weren't even any pipes at the front of the house where the living room was situated. Then, as they returned to the living room, they found Don staring into space unresponsive and saw water dripping upwards towards the ceiling. The local police were even summoned to the scene, and the officers who attended the Kiefer house reported seeing water dripping up through the floors and moving horizontally to the kitchen. Meanwhile, Donnie sat there in a trance-like state while the water rained down on him. In a bid to escape the house, the Kiefers ran across the road to a restaurant. The restaurant owner was shocked when she noticed water raining down the walls inside her restaurant too. She even handed Donnie a crucifix to banish him from the devil that was living inside of him. But when he held the crucifix, he complained that his skin burned. The restaurant owner was incredibly creeped out and ordered the Kiefers to return home. The moment that Donnie left the restaurant was the moment that the mysterious indoor rains stopped. Back at the Kiefer house, the rains continued, with everyone berating Donnie, accusing him of somehow masterminding the entire event. In response, Donnie began levitating off the floor, and items in the home were thrown about of their own accord before Donnie was thrown to the ground. It wasn't until the next morning, when a preacher was called to perform an exorcism, that the mysterious rains stopped. As the preacher reached the end of his prayers, a sense of calm washed over Donnie, and the mood returned to normal. But this wasn't meant to be. Donnie was returned to prison as his compassionate leave had ended, and the warden of the prison, Dave Keenhold, noticed the bizarre things were happening in Donnie Decker's cell. Once more, rain began to fall from where Donnie stood, and other prisoners ran in horror, too terrified to go near him. One officer even brought Donnie into his office and asked him to make it rain on command, which he did. A preacher was brought in for a final time to exorcise Donnie of his demons. As the preacher stood in Donnie's cell, the rains fell down on him, but his Bible remained bone dry. When all was said and done, the rains cleared and Donnie returned to his normal self. Since that day in 1983, Donnie Decker has never been able to make it rain on command again, and believes that a malevolent spirit possessed him. The creepy mystery of Donnie Decker, the man who could make it rain, has never been solved. Number 4. Campgoers at Arizona's Tonto National Park on Memorial Day weekend in 1995 had their peace and tranquility rudely interrupted when a 10-ton semi-truck came hurtling through the forest, stopping just short of where they were relaxing with their families. The driver of the truck, 29-year-old Devin Williams, showed no emotion, almost as if he was in a trance-like state. Instead of slowing down to see if everyone was okay, Devin continued driving as if the stretch of forest was a stretch of highway. Later that day, Devin's truck would be found abandoned in the Tonto National Park, with no sign of Devin at the wheel. The truth of what happened to Devin Williams has never been ascertained, and his case remains unsolved to this day. On the afternoon of Sunday, May 28, 1995, Deputy Dean Wells responded to reports of a stranded truck deep in the Tonto National Park. As he approached the 10-ton semi-truck, he noticed that the driver was nowhere to be found and that the cargo that he was carrying was intact. Deputy Wells noted that the cab was in immaculate condition, the opposite of how you'd assume a trucker to live. Deputy Wells spoke with those in the area and found that this wasn't the first time that his truck had been seen under mysterious circumstances. Lynn and Jack Yarrington told Wells that they had seen Devin in the days previously, and that he had been muttering strange things such as, "They made me do it, I'm going to jail." Devin's truck was taken away by the company he worked for, and there was no indication of a struggle or foul play. Days after Devin's truck had been found abandoned, Lynn and Jack Yarrington came across a disheveled Devin once again. As the days had passed, Devin's mental state had significantly deteriorated, and he refused all offers of help. Lynn later told investigators that she saw Devin hitting a $20 note with a rock, saying, "I've got to light the grill." As the interaction progressed, Devin became more and more irritated and threw the rock at Lynn and Jack, prompting them to leave. Jack and Lynn Yarrington are the last people to have seen Devin alive, and from here on out, the details of Devin's case only become more bizarre. When Devin failed to report back to work and failed to make contact with his wife, he was reported missing and a search was launched. Investigators believed that Devin may have been under the influence at the time, but according to the company he worked for, he passed every single screening they had performed. It wasn't until 1997 that his skull was found on the Mongolian Rim in Arizona, just a short distance from where he was last seen by Jack and Lynn. The coroner was unable to determine anything, and the rest of his body has never been recovered. If you have any information, you're asked to contact the sheriff's office at 928-774-4523. Number 3. David Bowie famously sang, "Is there life on Mars?" And for decades, scientists at NASA and space agencies around the world have been pondering the same question. In 1976, Vikings 1 and 2 touched down on the surface of Mars with the express mission of finding life there. NASA scientist Gilbert Levin was anxiously waiting as the two Vikings collected soil samples from Mars's surface. And as the results came in, his heart skipped a beat. One of the tests to detect for life showed up positive, meaning that the soil was emitting carbon-14 containing methane. This methane is a result of nutrients being eaten and then digested as methane mixed with carbon-14, which ultimately means a sign of life, no matter how minuscule the organism is. This news should have sent Levin and his team jumping for joy. But there was one problem. None of the other instruments or tests had shown a positive result. In 1977, the mission ended and the Vikings returned to Earth, leaving Levin confused about the results. Many of his colleagues pointed out that this result had merely been a false positive, but Levin, along with cell biologist Joe Miller, wasn't convinced. Miller was able to get a hold of the data from the 1976 mission and claims to have found emission evidence of a circadian cycle, proving that there is life on Mars. This claim has been refuted hundreds of times, and this is still a huge point of debate for those within the scientific circle to this day. In recent times, NASA has found that Mars's surface previously had water, which is a huge indicator of life. However, no further evidence has been brought forth to support Levin and Miller's hypothesis. Only new missions to Mars will tell if there really is carbon-14 emissions present, and to this day, the mystery of life on Mars continues to go unsolved. Number 2. 19-year-old Lisa O had the world at her feet. She was a budding hairdresser on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, and was just starting to make a life for herself. Sadly, Lisa would become the center of one of Hawaii's scariest unsolved mysteries that still haunts the country to this day. On January 21st, 1982, Lisa jumped into her car and headed for her boyfriend's sister's apartment, stopping on her way to pick up a few ingredients for tea. After eating a meal, she left the apartment, got into her 1976 Toyota, and made the journey home. After her boyfriend's sister waved goodbye, Lisa was never seen again. By the next morning, Lisa's parents were worried that their daughter hadn't returned home, and began calling around to see if anyone had seen her. To their horror, nobody had seen Lisa since she left her boyfriend's sister's apartment that night. Her boyfriend agreed to go and look for her, and on his way, he came across his first clue. On the side of the road in Oahu, he found Lisa's abandoned car. On the night of January 21st, 1982, it had been raining heavily in the area, and when Lisa's car was found, her windows had been wound down, allowing 2 to 3 inches of water to collect in her car. Everything inside of the car was drenched. That was, apart from her handbag, which sat bone dry on one of the soaking wet seats. Forensic investigators were unable to find any traces of evidence in Lisa's car, and the investigation had run cold before it had even started. On January 31st, 1982, Lisa's body was discovered on Mount Tantalus, which is around 16 miles away from where Lisa's car was found abandoned. Due to the amount of time that Lisa had been outside, the coroner wasn't able to gather much evidence from her body, and the verdict was recorded as undetermined. The local community were horrified that a young woman could disappear, only to be found 10 days later. Witnesses began coming forward, telling investigators that on the night of January 21st, they had seen a car fitted with blue flashing lights driving behind Lisa. Most of the passing motorists assumed that it was a police officer ordering Lisa to pull over, and they continued with their journey. Retrospectively, these motorists now realize just how close they may have come to the person responsible for Lisa's disappearance. Lisa's boyfriend was considered a suspect after it transpired that he failed 2 lie detector tests and was seen with scratches on his face the day after Lisa disappeared. As there's a lack of evidence to support these theories, her boyfriend has never been charged. There are no other suspects in Lisa's case, and 39 years on, her family are still looking for answers. If you have any information, you're asked to contact the Honolulu Police Department on 808-529-3111. Number 1. On December 1st, 1971, the Indiana Police Department was called to the scene of 1318 North LaSalle Street. From the outside, the home looks just like any other on the street, an unassuming and quiet one, a perfect place to raise a family. But for 40 years, this home has been the center of one of Indiana's creepiest unsolved mysteries, and has sat empty for the last few decades. Upon entering the home on December 1st, 1971, investigators were met with the bodies of 30-year-old Robert Henson, 27-year-old James C. Barker, and 34-year-old Robert Geers. Each man was found in a different part of the house and had all been dispatched using the same method. The crime shocked neighbors, but as the police dug further into the three men's private lives, it became apparent that they had made many enemies over the years. Indianapolis investigators uncovered that Geers and Hinson had started a microfilm company together, which angered Ted Euland, who they had previously worked for in the same industry. Geers and Hinson's business quickly became successful, and clients began taking their business to them, much to the annoyance of Euland. According to the Indy Star, Euland had taken out $150,000 in life insurance policies on Geers and Hinson in the months before their passing, leading investigators to label him as prime suspect number 1. Due to a lack of evidence, no charges were ever brought against Euland, and he passed away in the 90s, taking any secrets he had to his grave. Or so investigators thought. In 2001, a letter written by Fred Harbison was found in a safety deposit box, an associate of Euland claiming that Euland had hired him to take care of the three men on December 1st, 1971. The letter also went on to explain that Harbison had never received any of the money that he was promised. Sadly for investigators, Harbison was no longer around when the letter was discovered, and they were unable to bring him in for further questioning. According to Captain Robert Snow of the Indianapolis Police Department, the three businessmen were also involved in a competition to have as many female lovers as possible, with the winner earning themselves a steak dinner. In the process of their competition, they undoubtedly angered many boyfriends and husbands and caused rifts in relationships. In 2012, Snow wrote a book detailing the case and his attempts to solve the cold case that has haunted the department. In an interview with Fox 59, Snow told journalists, quote, "There were just too many suspects. I think that was the problem. They just couldn't narrow it down." 50 years later, and the mysterious case of the three businessmen at 1318 North LaSalle Street remains unsolved. The Indianapolis Police Department have told journalists that the case remains open, and anyone with information is urged to contact the Indianapolis Police Department at 317-327-3811. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.